In relation to climate change, what message do you have for religious leaders and why? What do you think that religious leaders are uniquely placed to do in this area?
I think that it's very telling that economists are coming to conclusions that embrace the ethical and the metaphysical, and I see that in both Professor Dasgupta's paper and other economists, but also in the output of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientists involved with climate change, who are also alighting upon these elements as an important way of, as it were, communicating to decision makers. But I think that in general, it's fulfilling this need that Dasgupta and others have identified for individual peace with nature being a necessary component of global peace with nature. And as far as Islamic relief is concerned, it's the financial commitments to environmental objectives need to be part of aid expenditure. So environment and aid have to be interlinked, because that's the only way that an organization like Islamic Relief can play its part. We've got to use the biosphere only to the extent that it's justifiable, and the generation of the inner drive to do that can possibly be reached by religion. I think Islam is particularly competent and able to appeal to exactly those ethical and moral and duties, and possibly there's been a lot of research on the fact, or a deal of research on the fact, that Islamic Relief has been involved with, but I think there's a possibility of communicating that to the Muslim population, and one hopes to the 80% of the world's population that self-identify as religious. You know, I think all the spiritual arguments come down to, you know, what's going to serve the purpose of the goodness of God, or you know, the equivalent in whatever faith. I think empowering citizenship. I think, you know, this is empowering citizenship is absolutely known to be a part and parcel of the transforming the systems that's necessary in order to create the economic changes that will allow us to make the decisions to work within planetary boundaries. That's what Islamic Relief is trying to do in terms of our work on locally led adaptation, where we're desperately trying to get the policy decisions made at the level of people affected by climate change. And also there's the educating ourselves. We need to be, you know, there needs to be a general education that we're part of nature, and that nature nurtures us. And that's the big, you know, that sounds spiritual, doesn't it? We are part of nature, and that nature nurtures us. That sounds like a spiritual statement, but that's a statement made by an economist. There needs to be a popular consensus, and I think that that's probably where the notion of appealing to people's ethical and spiritual life and to their beliefs and their, I mean, there's such a commonly held set of beliefs about the sanctity of creation, the duty of stewardship, the need for social justice. So all those things are embedded in world religions, and I think that they do talk to this individualization of thinking, to allow for, as Dasgupta calls it, peace with nature, although there's a lot to be said, you know, about what that means. I mean, you know, there needs to be a very different view of consumption and production patterns. That's another economic area, and that is specifically related to individual behavior, which is specifically related to individual psychology, and within that ethics and notions, I would say ethics, notions of what's right and what's wrong, and also to religion, in notions of duty of care, etc. And the question is, do they match the 1.5 limiting climate global warming heating to 1.5, or to a maximum of 2, but preferably to 1.5. I think there needs to be an understanding on the part of religious leaders about that, and then it's a question of witnessing the effects on the most vulnerable of climate change, given the trajectory that we're on. And how to adapt. So again, it's the same message I suppose I would be giving to the population in general, is be aware, become aware. So we've got these two elements of the first I mentioned was about what's called mitigation, reducing carbon emissions, eliminating carbon emissions, so limiting global heating. And the second one is about adaptation and addressing loss and damage, where you can't adapt because it's the most vulnerable of the people who are already the most vulnerable, essentially the world's poor and the world's marginalized, and I'd include in that in general women, indigenous peoples, the disabled. These are the people that are most vulnerable per se, and they are multiplicatorily, that's not a word, their vulnerability is multiplied by the effects of climate change. I think faith-based organizations can offer a unique contribution to the narrative and achievement of just transition. But we're talking about the G20. I mean, we really should be talking about economics. I mean, we should be talking in economics language. I don't think there's any point in trying to sort of bring in an ethical point without relating it to the economics. So when your question is how can you affect political will, it's by talking to people in the language that they understand and that they're already communicating in. So the effectual area of the G20 is the finance ministers. So you really have to talk economics to them and to their advisors. And I think, I think that the planetary boundaries notion is the sort of logical starting point in saying, well, we can't carry on going as we're going. And that, I think that's generally accepted as, it's evident even to the most hard-headed of finance ministers who